So, Elvis was directed by Baz Luhrmann, and it tells the story of American icon Elvis Presley and his relationship with his manager, Colonel Tom Parker. And right off the bat, I would like to begin by thanking Warner Bros. Canada for inviting us to a press screening of this film earlier last week. It honestly meant a lot. We had an amazing time. It was a great experience. So yeah, thank you, Warner Bros., for inviting us to this amazing opportunity. But yeah, okay, before I give you all my thoughts on the film and what I thought of Baz Luhrmann's Elvis, I guess I should begin by letting you all know what my relationship with Elvis Presley is and what my anticipation levels were like coming into this film. So right off the bat, I will say that my introduction to Elvis Presley was actually Lilo and Stitch. You know, when I was very little and I saw Lilo and Stitch for the first time, I think that was the first time when I became aware that someone called Elvis Presley existed. That said, sort of at the same time, I remember that every time that an Elvis song would play on the radio, my parents would always point it out and let me know that that was the music of my grandparents, whatever that meant. That said, even though my parents kept calling it the music of my grandparents, you know, I kept listening to it, and I quickly became a, you know, pretty big fan of Elvis music. And nowadays, I would say that I love his music, I love his songs, and I am a fan of his work. That said, despite the fact that I would consider myself a fan of Elvis music, I don't really know much about Elvis's life. Or, well, I guess I should say I didn't know much about Elvis's life, because that all changed when I saw this film. But yeah, even though I loved his songs, I never knew much about Elvis, about, you know, the person behind the songs and about his life story. So therefore, when they announced that they were making a music biopic about Elvis Presley, I got really excited. You know, I got really excited because, first of all, it would give me a chance to learn about Elvis Presley's life. And second of all, because it's directed by Baz Luhrmann. And okay, for those of you who don't know, Baz Luhrmann has directed other movies such as Moulin Rouge, The Great Gatsby, and Romeo plus Juliet. And even though I don't love all of his films, I will say that I respect his work very, very much. And I think that all of his films are very interesting and are doing some incredible stuff, especially with style and editing and, you know, colors and visuals and imagery. It's very interesting stuff. So yeah, once again, even though I don't love all of his films, I really respect it and I find it very interesting. So I was very excited to see what Baz Luhrmann, a filmmaker with an incredibly flamboyant style, would do with a character like Elvis Presley, who also was very flamboyant and very energetic and very colorful. I don't know. For some reason, it seemed like a match made in heaven, and I was very excited to see what happened. You know, and from there on out, my anticipation for this film kept growing and it kept getting bigger and bigger. I remember hearing about this film premiering at the Cannes Film Festival and receiving a 12-minute standing ovation. That was absolutely insane, and that got me even more excited for this film. Then eventually I got invited to this press screening and I saw the film and I absolutely loved it. I thought Elvis was an amazing, amazing film. That said, before I really give you all my thoughts on what specific elements I loved about Elvis, I will make one small clarification, you know, one little caveat before we keep going. And that little clarification is that, you know, as I said, I don't really know much about Elvis's life. I don't really know much about what actually happened in real life to Elvis Aaron Presley. So I won't be reviewing this film taking into account how historically accurate it is or how loyal it is to Elvis's real life story. I'm not going to do that. I am sure there are hundreds of YouTube channels that can do that a lot better than I can. So, you know, when giving my review of Elvis, I am just going to focus on reviewing this film as I would any other piece of cinema, whether it is fiction or non-fiction. Considering that, the first element that I will tackle when talking about Elvis will be the story and the script, you know, the story that the film tells. And when it comes to the story, the first thing I will mention is that I thought it was a bit conventional. It was somewhat conventional, somewhat ordinary. You know, it's conventional in the sense that, you know, just like most music biopics, you know, it spans through decades. It covers a time period roughly from the 1940s to the 1970s. It shows you Elvis throughout his entire life. For some reason, particularly in the last couple of decades, instead of really delving into a specific moment of a person's life and really exploring what that person was thinking and feeling in that specific section of his life, instead of doing that, they just go throughout his life pointing out the greatest hits and the single most important moments, and it feels very rushed and it feels very hectic, and it doesn't really allow us to know the person that well. It just gives us like a Spark Notes summary of what his life was like. Elvis also uses that greatest hits approach. You don't really have much time to delve into any specific section of his life. It just goes, bit by bit, telling you the most important moments of his career and of his life. That said, for some reason, here it works, and I will touch upon that a bit later. So yeah, bringing it back once again in terms of the story is a bit ordinary. It's a bit usual. It's a bit, your paint by the numbers music biopic, I guess, when it comes to the script. That said, there are some unconventional elements that are sprinkled throughout the story that I think make the script a bit more entertaining and a bit more interesting. And, those unconventional elements are, first of all, the fact that the whole film is narrated from the perspective of the antagonist, who in this case is Tom Hanks' Colonel Tom Parker, who Colonel Tom Parker was Elvis's manager. So yeah, he is the antagonist of the film, and he is also the narrator of the movie. And the fact that he narrates the whole film is very cool, because first of all, it allows for a non-linear structure. After all, Colonel Tom Parker, when he narrates this film and when he narrates his story of what he lived with Elvis Presley, he's literally on his deathbed in a hospital, hooked on morphine, about to die. And yeah, he's just remembering his life and remembering his past experiences. So of course, someone who is on his deathbed remembering experiences from his life, of course he's not going to remember them in order. So it makes sense that, that they tell the story in a non-linear way. And I really, really like that. And second of all, the fact that Elvis's manager narrates the whole film is also very cool, because it allows for some really trippy and surrealist imagery. Like, okay, don't get me wrong, all Baz Luhrmann films that I've seen contain some insane visuals and some very trippy moments and some very surrealist sequences. But in Baz Luhrmann films, it's usually, like, they don't usually explain in terms of the story why those elements are there and why those trippy visuals are there. But here they do. Those visual elements and those trippy visuals are here in this film because, once again, the whole movie's narrated from the perspective of someone who's dying, who's hallucinating, and who's hooked on morphine. So, of course, he's gonna see some weird stuff. The Baz Luhrmann trippy visuals feed in perfectly, considering this story structure of having it being narrated by Colonel Tom Parker. And yeah, in terms of the visuals, this film is insane. Like, throughout the movie, you have Ferris wheels that turn into spinning records, you have eyes that turn into casino roulettes, you have moments where it turns into animation, and then it goes back to live action, and then it goes into slow motion, and then it goes into split screen. It's insane. It's very visually inventive, but once again, from a story perspective, it makes sense, and it fits. Now, so those are the two first reasons of why I think it is cool that the whole film is narrated from the perspective of, Tom Hanks' character. That said, the third and final reason why I think that is a very good idea is because it reminds me of two of my favorite biopics of all time. And those biopics are Milos Forman's Amadeus and the Broadway musical Hamilton. Both of those films are also narrated from the perspective of the antagonist, I guess I should say. Amadeus is told from the perspective of Salieri, who is Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart's antagonist. And then Hamilton is sort of narrated by Aaron Burr, who is Alexander Hamilton's antagonist. So yeah, having Elvis be narrated by, Colonel Tom Parker reminds me a lot of this biopics in a very cool way. And I really, really like that. I really like that detail. So yeah, once again, bringing it back a bit, in terms of some of the unconventional elements that the script of Elvis employs, the first one is that it is narrated from the perspective of the antagonist. Now, the other two unconventional elements that this film employs is, first of all, this film focuses a lot on the relationship in between Elvis and his manager. And this is something that I really enjoyed because, most music biopics don't really focus on this aspect. Most music biopics focus on the art. They focus on the music. They focus on the artist coming up with different ideas and coming up with the lyrics and coming up with the melodies. And then, they end up writing a masterpiece and they end up writing a great song. And usually the managers are like, they're either simple antagonists or they're just obstacles or they're secondary characters in these biopics. But no, here, Elvis's manager is a co-lead. He is just as important as Elvis Presley. He gets just as much screen time. He even gets to narrate the movie. And yeah, really going into the nitty-gritty and exploring that relationship I thought was great, and I thought made the film a lot better, a lot more unique, and a lot more interesting, I guess you could say. Now, the last unconventional element that I think this film introduces is the fact that this film also pays a lot of attention on the fans' reaction to Elvis Presley. I think this is very cool because most music biopics don't really pay attention to this. You know, the fans are sort of taken for granted. You know, you see the musicians and you see the artists and you see them rise in prominence and you see them become famous. And then, yeah, you see millions of fans going to their concerts, but you never really get a sense of what the interactions in between the fans and the artists it's like. You just, you know, they're just taken for granted, once again. And I love the fact that in this film they don't. And they really explore the effect that Elvis and his music have on his fans. You know, you see them losing their minds, you see them screaming, you see them throwing panties on stage. It's really cool. It's an aspect of a music biopic that I frankly haven't seen that much before, and I really like the fact that, you know, this film pays a lot of attention to that. That said, despite these three big unconventional elements that the film employs, the story of the film is still pretty, you know, ordinary. It's still pretty common for most music biopics. And in the hands of a different director, I believe this film could have been, you know, your roll-of-the-mill, paint-by-the-numbers music biopic that would have been very uninteresting and somewhat boring. This is not that. And in the hands of Baz Luhrmann, instead of just being another forgettable paint-by-the-numbers music biopics, this turns into a music biopic that I will never forget. Because Baz Luhrmann's unique and flamboyant style fit in perfectly with the type of story they're telling, with the Elvis character, and with the way the story is told. I guess now it is time to discuss Baz Luhrmann, you know, the director of this film, and his contribution to this movie. And the first thing I will mention is that this film is 100% a Baz Luhrmann film. All of the elements that you can expect from a Baz Luhrmann movie are here, and they are amazing. You get the vibrant colors, you get the non-diegetic music, you get the slow motion, you get the split screen, you get the fades, you get the showy costumes, you get the inventive visuals, the animation sequences, the extremely fast-paced editings, and more, and you know, all of the elements that you can associate to a Baz Luhrmann films are here. Also, by the way, now that I mentioned the fact that this film has some extremely fast-paced editing, I'm not exaggerating. I believe that there's not a single shot in this film that lasts for more than 4 seconds. And that is great. That is Baz Luhrmann. You know, that is how fast-paced and energetic and electrifying his movies are. So it fits perfectly. So yeah, once again, Baz Luhrmann, his direction and his visuals really save the film. That said, he is not the only person in charge of saving this movie and turning it into, you know, as great of a film as it is. And, you know, the other two people I need to give credit to are, you know, Austin Butler and Tom Hanks, the main actors of the film. So yeah, I guess it's time we discuss a little bit about the performances. So when it comes to the performances, I will start off by talking about Austin Butler, and I will just say right out of the bat that Austin Butler in this film gives one of the best performances I've seen in recent years. He was amazing. He didn't only act like Elvis, he became Elvis. He sang like Elvis, he talked like Elvis, he moved like Elvis, he danced like Elvis. Like, his mere presence was so electrifying, so full of energy, so exciting, and just so insanely Elvis that my jaw dropped while watching this film. I kid you not, every single time that Elvis Presley goes on stage in this film, the film just catches fire, and it becomes some of the best cinema I've seen in a while. Like, it's absolutely insane. And, you know, a big part of that is the build-up that the film employs to the reveal of Elvis Presley's character. You know, when the film begins, you don't really see much of Elvis. You see him in the shadows. You see him obscured. You see him jittering and being nervous before his first performance. But you never really truly see him. And the first time when you truly get a look of Elvis Presley, and the first time when you really see him, is when he's on stage about to perform his first song in the film. And as soon as he opens his mouth and he starts moving and he starts singing, it's just absolutely insane. Once again, Austin Butler, he becomes Elvis Presley. I absolutely adored his performance. There's not enough praise I could say. And honestly, the best way I could put it is I would be extremely surprised if coming award season, Austin Butler is not in the conversation for Best Actor. I think he killed it. And yeah, I definitely think he deserves being at least in the conversation. And now that I've talked enough about Austin Butler, I think it is time that we move on to Austin Butler's co-lead, and that is Tom Hanks acting as Colonel Tom Parker. And right off the bat, I will say, I thought Tom Hanks was great. I've seen some people online arguing or, complaining about the fact that apparently Tom Hanks took some strong creative decisions. And apparently his accent and, some of his expressions weren't really that authentic to the accent and the expressions of the real-life Colonel Tom Parker. That said, once again, as I said before I started with my review, I'm not reviewing this film based on historical accuracy. I'm not reviewing this film based on how accurate it is and how loyal it is to the real-life people. So that wasn't an issue for me. And I thought his performance was great. And I thought the strong creative decisions he made really paid off. Sure, his performance is hammy, it is cheesy, and it is a bit strange, but in the best way possible. I really, really loved what Tom Hanks did here. And yeah, I thought his performance was excellent. That said, like, some little thing that I want to point out when it comes to Tom Hanks is that, I love Tom Hanks. I think he's one of the best actors working today. I really, really love his work. Some of the things that I love the most about Tom Hanks is that, he has built a career constantly playing the same sort of type of character, which is, constantly playing the good old American hero, a good person, a good heroic person who embodies all of the attributes and values of the American dream and of the American society. But now, in 2022, he is finally asked to get out of his comfort zone, to not play a good old American character anymore, and to play a morally ambiguous person who is very sketchy, very shady, very sleazy, and just not a good human being. And I thought he killed it. I thought he kicked it out of the stadium, I guess. He kicked it out of the park. I'm sorry. And yeah, the main reason why I would like to give credit to Tom Hanks' performance is because his role isn't easy. Like, it isn't easy to pull off Colonel Tom Parker, because if you're acting as Colonel Tom Parker, you can't just act as a 100% completely evil character. Because that would just make Elvis Presley seem stupid. Because why the hell would he trust in someone who is acting like an evil person from the get-go? So yeah, the character of Colonel Tom Parker has layers. He has nuance. If you're acting as Colonel Tom Parker, you need to act as if you were trustworthy while at the same time being untrustworthy. You need to act as if you were a wolf in sheep clothing. And that is not easy to do. To act as someone, acting as someone else, that is not easy to pull off. And I think Tom Hanks killed it. Once again, this whole movie is centered on their relationship, on the relationship in between Elvis Presley and Colonel Tom Parker. So if any of their performances wouldn't have worked, the whole film would have failed. And I'm so glad both of them brought their A game, because, yeah, there's a reason why this film is amazing. And part of that reason is both of their performances. And their performances are so essential because they really drive through, like, one of the main things. And that is the fact that this movie, this Elvis Presley biopic, it is a cautionary tale. It is a cautionary tale about the dangers of fame and fortune. And it is a cautionary tale about the fact that, you have to be careful who you trust, especially if these people only have their own best intentions in mind. Both of those messages were carried through perfectly, and that is in part thanks to both of these incredible performances. That said, now that I've raved enough about this film, and now that I've let you all know everything that I love about this movie, there is one minor detail that I would like to point out as something that could have been better throughout the film, and that is, I wish this movie would have done a better job at transmitting the passage of time in a visual way. Once again, considering the fact that this is a Baz Luhrmann film, the film is very hectic, it is very fast-paced, it is very visually interesting, and it tells the story in a non-linear way. So sometimes it was a bit difficult to keep track of what year we're on, and not only that, but also how much time has passed since the previous scene. So, I sort of wish they would have been more title cards with the dates on them, so that you would always know what year we were on. Also, perhaps they could have used a bit more prosthetics and a bit more makeup in Austin Butler, so that you could clearly see, okay, Elvis is aging, a lot of time has passed since the previous scene. But yeah, that is very nitpicky. Those are very minor things. And in conclusion, yeah, I love this film. I thought this film was absolutely amazing. And when it comes to giving it a score, I honestly think I would give it a 9 out of 10, which means I think this film was absolutely amazing. yeah, I love Elvis. I can't wait for you all to watch it. And, please let us know in the comments what you thought of the film whenever you do see it.